Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. I think I have a really good video for you. I know we talk about prison, and a lot of people think that if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. So I wanted to touch on those that, well, their crime might have been mental illness. And mental illness is a very common affliction. More than 50% of people in the world have some sort of mental illness. So if that is a crime, then most of us should be doing the time. Anyway, before I go on with the video, I want you to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any time I post a new video. And then we're going to go ahead with it.
I played it innocent, a feel of discontent. I'm finally facing it all, fearless.
All right, so there was this channel I found on Instagram called Voiceless America. So I want to give them credit for the photos that you're going to see here, because I'm going to show you the photos and then explain what you see on those photos. So basically, we're going to start with the first one, and that will explain what I'm talking about. So the first one, as you can see, is a restraint chair. So every year, somebody with mental illness dies inside of a jail cell. And they die while being tied down, just like the man in the photo you see. Now, if you tell me that is just or humane, it's definitely not. So usually if something is deemed unsafe, the government will issue a mass recall. Yet these chairs have been proven unsafe. People die in them, but they continue to allow to use these inside institutions every day. So I wanted to actually go state by state. I don't have every state, but I think I got enough to show you exactly how much inhumane actions take place in each state. So we're going to start with Florida. If you take a look, the surveillance video in Florida shows a Miami-Dade County correctional officer beating a handicapped and handcuffed incarcerated person for about 10 seconds at Metro West Detention Center in Doral. Again, this person is handicapped and handcuffed. So Delman Lumpkin, the Miami-Dade corrections officer, he punched Mike Neal for about 10 seconds, landing 15 blows with both hands. And when it was over, Lumpkin charged Neal with the crime. Lumpkin reported to Miami-Dade police that he was attacked by Neal. He stated that Neal used his cane as a weapon. Neal was charged with felony aggravated assault, yet nothing was done to Lumpkin. A year later, after prosecutors reviewed critical footage from a jail camera, charges of felony aggravated assault were reduced to misdemeanor assault, and the charge of stalking was added, even though he did absolutely nothing. Neal said that he and Lumpkin had several previous encounters, and that Neal filed grievances over some of those encounters to Lumpkin's supervisors. However, the grievances were ignored. This last encounter ended with Neal requiring medical attention after Lumpkin became physical and assaulted him. And eventually all charges were dropped against Neal. So the next one I'm going to get you to look at is Alabama. We know Alabama has their problems. However, what you see here is this is the moment when Department of Corrections Sergeant Cole attacks a handcuffed prisoner who is already on his knees inside Elmore Correctional Facility. This is in Alabama. Sergeant Cole escorted a handcuffed prisoner into the office of her shift commander, Lieutenant Cooper. After ordering the prisoner to kneel down, Sergeant Cole waited until both of the prisoner's knees touched the floor before striking him at least 3 times in the head and face. Instead of resisting, the man did not resist. He was incarcerated. He curled into a fetal position with his hands cuffed behind his back and remained motionless on the ground as she attacked him. Caught on the surveillance video, Lieutenant Cooper and fellow correctional officer sit at their desks and make no attempt to stop Cole, because why should they, right? After stepping away for a moment, Cole returns on screen to hit the prisoner in the head again. While taking off her jacket, Cole appears to be ranting and raving at her co-workers who continue to ignore the abuse they just witnessed. So although Cooper did send the prisoner to the prison's health care unit afterwards, the shift commander did not bother to file an incident report nor notify his supervisors. The name of the incarcerated person involved has not been released in order to protect him from any retaliation. The next photo you have is Virginia. I know it's a little bit blurry because it needed to protect, obviously, some parts of a person that shouldn't be seen. So in Virginia, this is Natasha McKenna, a diagnosed schizophrenic. She died at age 37 at a jail in Fairfax County in Virginia, where she was being held awaiting transfer to Alexandria on charges of assaulting a peace officer. Alexandria officials has failed to take custody of McKenna 3 times during her 8-day stay at the Fairfax County Jail. During preparation for her transfer, McKenna began struggling with the deputies after one of them coaxed her into being handcuffed. She's schizophrenic, and they're getting her handcuffed. A crisis team responded, which precipitated a lengthy ordeal with deputies in biohazard suits struggling with a nude McKenna in her soiled cell. So this is why that picture's a little bit blurry, because she is nude and her cell is soiled. In an attempt to put her in a restraint chair with a spit hood eventually over her face. One prisoner who witnessed the incident said McKenna was making sounds that someone possessed by demons might make. No doubt the 4 times she was tased by the crisis team contributed to those inhumane noises. I don't even have words for this, but let's continue. On the video, you can actually hear her say, "You promised me you wouldn't kill me. I didn't do anything." She reportedly said this as she was being removed from her cell over and over. McKenna stopped breathing shortly after she was secured in the restraint chair. She was taken to a hospital where she died a few days later. A post-mortem revealed her heart had given out as a result of excited delirium, which is a condition that mentally ill and drug-intoxicated persons allegedly experience when heavily stressed or agitated. This woman is no longer with us. And again, if you tell me she did a crime and she deserves that kind of time, there's no humanity in anybody with those thoughts. Colorado. Again, a lot of those pictures are blurry because, well, nobody wants to publish these photos. So again, thank you to Voiceless America for finding them. Apparently, sadly, they can be found. And how many are not found? Anyway, moving on to Colorado. Carolyn O'Neill, a grandmother of 3 that you see here, she's only 5'4" and 123 pounds. So a tiny person. Again, she's a grandmother of 3. She was taking a bath when officers came into her home for a wellness check. So a wellness check is if you call, you just want to double check that person's okay, a neighbor can do it, anything like that. So the officers showed up because she yelled at them to get out, and then they arrested her because she said get out, and took her while she was naked. So this poor woman, this grandmother, is in the bathtub. She doesn't want the officers there. She is naked. Instead of waiting outside, they arrested her. So the officers in Fremont County Jail at Colorado said that she tried to throw an elbow at a 250-pound deputy. So they threw her on the ground, even though she was only about 20 feet from a cell, still made no effort to cover her up. Next, the deputies brought out a restraint chair because that's logical. She needs to be restrained for taking a bath. They picked her up, put her on the chair naked, put a spit mask over her face, and wheeled her into the cell. But they left the door open and started taking video of this while she was in the chair. Isn't that nice of them? She was in that chair for 4 hours. A smock was initially placed over O'Neill, but it kept falling away. So about half hour into the time that she was in that restraint chair, she managed to wiggle one of the ankles out of the ankle restraints. I can't show you that on here. She was trying to cross her legs, so she tried to wiggle out of that. And because she saw an inmate across the way jerking off, she was naked and she was embarrassed, and well, she was, again, a grandmother. And apparently that's somehow wrong. Well, this post didn't suit a deputy. He walked by the short time later and they geared up a team to force her legs apart and keep her in that restraint. They forced her right foot into the restraint. They strapped her in and she was up on the ball of the other foot. So to get her to put it down, they put a pressure hold on her to get her to comply. This is a tiny little woman. So O'Neill yelled at them, trying to preserve her right to protect her body. So they tased her while she was in the restraint chair. And that's when her foot went down. After 4 hours, O'Neill was finally moved from the chair to the cell, where she lingered, still naked, for another 8 hours. There was no charges filed. She did nothing wrong. She was taking a bath. But now she's been humiliated, put into a cell, naked. I really have to move on to the next one. North Carolina. So here we have John Neville, who is a 56-year-old father of 2. He shouted out, "I can't breathe," for more than 20 times and called out for his mother in some newly released footage. In the footage, John Neville has seen being restrained by prison guards before his death. Neville has been put in a hog-tie position by prison guards at the Forsyth County Jail in Winston-Salem at North Carolina. One of the videos shows a group of guards who had gathered around Neville as he was being restrained in a chair with a restraining bag on his head. He is heard shouting, "Help me, let me go, I can't breathe, let me go, please, please, I can't breathe," over and over and over. He pleaded this. It can be seen that the officers did not take this seriously at all. They downplayed and laughed off the entire situation. Mr. Neville was pronounced dead at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. An autopsy said he died due to positional and compressional asphyxia during prone restraint. So you can't tell me they didn't kill him. Okay, California. Here we have Andrew Holland, 36 years old. He was bound naked in the restraint chair that we've seen that proves to kill people. Anyway, he was bound in it for 46 hours in San Luis Obispo County Jail. Sorry if I butchered the name of that one. This is in California before he lost consciousness and died. He had been stuck in that chair after he began to self-harm in the cell. He was only freed days later for the officers to remove urine and feces, which is collected underneath it. So if the urine and feces didn't show up, they wouldn't have even known he was dead. Video from that day shows guards watching from outside the cell, laughing as he was writhing on the floor, struggling to breathe. Andrew suffered from schizophrenia. And he suffers from schizophrenia since at least his early 20s, maybe even before that. He has been in and out of jail on low-level offenses. He was arrested resisting an officer and probation violations. He then spent 15 months inside a cramped isolation cell with just enough room for a thin mattress, a toilet, and a sink. He often fought with staff and regularly self-harmed. So instead of getting help for this person, he's no longer alive to receive it. But 2 days before his death, he repeatedly hit himself in the face while sitting on the bed in that isolation cell. Shortly after, a group of right armor-clad deputies and what appears to be jail medical staff they transported a naked Holland face down into a glass door cell used to house drunk inmates. Because that's the same thing, right? He then spent the next 46 hours tied down in a restraint chair before he died. Oklahoma. So here we have Darius Robinson, a father of 7. He was arrested on a warrant for failing to pay child support. He's not a violent criminal. It's child support. So 3 days later, he suffered a manic episode inside the Caddo County jail cell in Oklahoma. A video released by the jail shows him waving around a blanket, tearing up pieces of paper, and writhing on the floor. So 2 correctional officers, Michael Allen Smith and Vicki Lynn Richardson. For those of you who don't watch TV, you might have seen Miss Richardson recently helping an inmate escape, where both of them have been found dead now. Or she was found dead now. I'm not sure. Anyway, Miss Richardson was part of this. So for anybody cheering for her, I'm not. So 2 officers, Michael Allen Smith and Vicki Lynn Richardson, were seen going into the cell, and eventually he calmed down, settled on a bench with Smith standing in front of him. When Robinson leaned forward, Smith responded by wrapping his arm around the victim's neck as Richardson pepper sprayed him. I can't even demonstrate it. The 2 men fell on the floor, and Smith trapped Robinson in what is known as guillotine chokehold, while Richardson handcuffed him. A 3rd jailer came in and stood on Robinson's back. As the life began to drain away from Robinson's body, the jailers attempted a chest compression before propping him up on the side, as the suffocation was causing him to foam at the mouth. By the time the paramedics arrived, his pulse was gone. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. A state medical examiner ruled that Robinson's death was a homicide, and he was killed by manual compression of the neck. No charges were filed against the officers. So now we're going to go to Hawaii, which always made me think of vacation, not anymore. So Hawaiian pride with the American prison culture. That's what we have here. Even in the middle of the Pacific, we cannot escape the brutality that happens to prisoners by correctional officers. In this case, officers assumed they were no longer in view of the camera, and they started to beat a handcuffed man. A helpless, handcuffed man. I wonder what they would have done any longer until they realized the camera was still on. All right, moving to New York. So inside Clinton Danmora Prison in New York, correction officers beat and tortured a man suffering from schizophrenia. Realizing they may have killed him, they dragged his lifeless body to the prison clinic, and they didn't even request a gurney. His name is Leonard Strickland, and he was already dead. The medical report from the ambulance crew showed that Strickland had suffered extensive injuries with heavy bruises, a missing tooth, and blood and clear fluid draining from his ears. Several state investigators of the incident found no wrongdoing. Really, no wrongdoing. No prison staff, guards, or medical were even disciplined or reprimanded in any way, shape, or form. It was business as usual. The reason it's business as usual is this kind of stuff happens every single day, every state, every jail, every prison. Michigan. So the correctional officer you see here in Michigan, he slammed this already handcuffed woman and split her head open. Instead of giving her first aid, because that might have actually been a logical thing later. No, he let her bleed out. Somehow she was still a threat to him, even though she was unconscious and handcuffed. Maryland. So here, We have correctional officers using a choker sleep hold on a female prisoner. The only female officer doesn't seem bothered by any of it because for her this is normal. Because this is normal. This is just, like they say, this is prison. This is jail. It's just normal. Moving on to Florida. I know you see the cell, and this is an ad seg, which is the whole segregation, etc. For those of you who don't know, that is a 12 gauge shotgun. You can do serious damage with it. So in Florida, correction officers will shoot you if you just don't comply. Even if you don't hear them. You don't comply because you don't hear them. They'll shoot you. So inside the cell here is a man suffering from schizophrenia who's having a schizophrenic episode. He's in no way a danger of hurting himself or anyone else. He's in a segregated unit. He's not able to hurt himself. He's not able to hurt others. But the problem was the warden was annoyed because he was loud. He was yelling. So they decided it was best to open the food port, that's the little chute, and shoot him in the groin. Tell me if this is justice. Well, now we move to Georgia. Inside a Georgia juvenile prison, so this is a juvenile. These are kids now we're looking at. An officer's choking a child, and then he knees him in the groin. This is not a way to motivate a child to do better. I don't know who's taking parenting classes or rehabilitation in any form, but if you want this kid to do better, choking and kneeing him in the groin is not the way to do it. So on the street, so in the free world out here, we call this endangering the welfare of a child or of a minor. It is punishable by 5 to 10 years in prison. But for a correctional officer, this is simply retribution. What did this boy do wrong? He interrupted a Sunday football game. Ohio. So if the picture here is bothering you, because I couldn't look at it for a while, it should bother you. So what's going on here is another assault against a woman by someone who took an oath to protect. This time it is an Ohio correctional officer. He puts OC directly into her eyes and nose while strapped in a restraint chair. Texas. Texas is known for breaking rules. So every state, including Texas, you will see this as a common thing. Officers brutally beating a prisoner who is voiceless and helpless. So there's no such thing as a humane prison. The caption on this by the person who wrote it was custody equals torture. Tennessee. The prisoner in Tennessee, you see here, was tied to a restraint chair. Again, we're looking at those famous restraint chairs, while an officer tased him numerous times. The repeated and prolonged use of a taser against a fully restrained person amounts to torture by law. And the photo speaks to itself. I wish it wasn't this easy to keep finding these kind of stories to show you guys, but there it is. And ironically, these are proudly posted by the prisons, by the Department of Corrections. Now we go to Connecticut. Connecticut is notorious for not following the laws in every way, shape, or form. So I have a series of photos here for you. You're going to have to follow them. So as you look at photo 1, then 2, and then 3, and then eventually come to a hospital photo, and that's photo number 4. So what goes on here is a prison transport. So this is in New Haven, Connecticut. During a prison transport in New Haven, Connecticut, officers' careless driving leaves this prisoner paralyzed from the neck down. They didn't put him in the van properly. They didn't secure him. The way that they were driving, they wrecked his entire spine. And then they realized this. So to cover up their crime, they drag his lifeless body out of the transport van and then throw him into a cell and call for help. Hey, they didn't do anything. Who somebody did it. They just called for help. So he is, well, he was paralyzed, and now he's not alive anymore. Mississippi. No surprise it didn't take long to find police brutality behind walls of Mississippi. Nowhere in the world would we think carrying somebody hogtied behind the back standard is even legal. But here, the camera footage speaks for itself. Mississippi has one of the most neglected, corrupt DOC in the entire country. Now we have Indiana. Indiana's not much better. So inside this Elkhart prison, the inmate is handcuffed to a chair, and the officer beat this man while everybody laughed. So we're still trying to find a state that does not violently assault people they incarcerate, are we? New Jersey. So in here we see kind of difficult to watch that, to know what's going on, but the woman in there is Edna Mahan, is the only women's prison in New Jersey. Officers raid a cell in the middle of the night and beat the women in the ADSEG unit and try to cover it up. That's what they do. How many times before this time did they get away with it? Just because this time they got caught on camera. How many times have they done it? Almost daily. And who's covering this up on a regular basis? So the officers here, they rob families of their mothers, and they feel they have a license to abuse women. Most already suffer abuse before prison. When does it stop? Now we go to Illinois. When you see this woman, she's in Chicago, and she disobeyed the officer's order to turn her head during a mugshot. So he shoved her into all concrete cell, and the face first impact with the concrete fractured her right orbital bone, loosened some of her teeth, and opened a deep cut on her cheek. She now has to live with a titanium plate in her head. Delaware. In Delaware, correctional officers here, they drag a woman who is handcuffed behind her back. So before this, they actually slammed her into the ground and nearly knocked her out. This is called inhumane, but it's happening every day. So Minnesota. Ramsey County Jail in Minnesota, officers here are beating an inmate while he's, surprise, surprise, in a restraint chair. Pattern? I'm seeing a pattern. This happens every single day. Doesn't matter what state, there's restraint chairs, there's beatings. How do you expect somebody to rehabilitate when they're beating you for the most minor infractions or a mental illness? All right, so we're going to go into Utah, and that was, again, not great to see. But here in Utah, if you do not comply with a direct order, they open up your food slot and shoot you with a rubber bullet. That is considered standard operating procedure. It's actually right in the DOC handbook, SOP, standard operating procedures. If they tell you to do something, you don't immediately do it. Open and shoot. Going to Maine. Correctional officers are spraying a man's face while he's tied down in a restraint chair. Just another Monday in prison. It is. Have anybody noticed that there's a pattern of police brutality in the prisons? That is how they're trained. That is normal. It's just another Monday. Arkansas. So again, here we have a juvenile detention. This is a child you're looking at. And what they do is they use a wrap to restrain the child. Or they restrain children with these wraps. They consider it legal and humane. So locking up juveniles need to stop. And these restraints need to be illegal. Now, imagine for any of you that have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, imagine this. Wisconsin. Same culture, different state. We have Wisconsin corrections officers, and they beat this man into submission while tied down in a restraint chair. Again, typical afternoon for an inmate inside Columbia Correctional Institution. New Mexico. So here, Las Cruces, I hope I pronounced that right too. New Mexico. Again, officers beat a handcuffed man senseless. Why? Because they can. He didn't do anything, actually. It's because they can. And no charges are filed, of course. Vermont. So here we have Sergeant Jason Lawton. He hit Amy Conley, who's 35 years old, while her hands were bound behind her back, and he left her with a black eye after she became distressed in custody and kicked the cell door. The footage from St. Albans City Jail in Vermont shows that Conley was crying as she sat on the bench, kicking the door of her tiny holding cell. Now remember, these are not even prison. That's just a holding cell. So the Sergeant Lawton, he's not even a correctional officer. He's a sergeant. He enters in and says, listen to me, don't kick the door. She stands up. She didn't sit down. So what he did, instead of actually telling her to sit down, no, he shoved her forcefully back on the bench, slamming her into the wall. She was so shocked by his aggressive behavior that she cried, "How F dare you?" Yes, she used the swear word. And he replied, listen to me really good. The camera kind of cut out on what he said to her, but you can hear her talk to another officer. She was saying, he hurt me. He was saying, he hurt me, and she pointed to Sergeant Lawton. And Sergeant Lawton's response was, shut up. So then Connolly kicked out at him. This doesn't show on camera. He states that she kicked at him. So allegedly, she kicked at him. And he responded by saying, you F kicked me. Then he rammed her against the bench and uppercut her in the face while she was stooped forward. With the help of a colleague, because it takes two to handle a little woman, Lawton then grabbed the vulnerable suspect and hauled her face first on the floor, saying, that was real stupid, okay? Now do you understand me? So now she's struggling to talk, and they cuffed her legs together, and three cops, one little female, 3 cops held her down as Lawton forced his knee into her back and she cried in pain. Washington. So here we have Malika Cahoon, who was 15 years old. Okay. Again, we're talking about children. 15 years old. She was attacked in a King County in Seattle, Washington jail cell by a guard by the name of Paul Skeeve, who was 31. The guy was double her age and size. The attack began after she kicked off a shoe in the direction of the deputy. In the video, you can see the deputy kicks the girl, pushing her back towards the wall. The deputy then strongly backs the girl against the wall and slams her to the floor by grabbing her hair. Now we got a second deputy who comes in, and he's a trainee. He enters the holding cell while the first deputy is holding the girl face down on the floor. The first deputy appears to hit the girl with his hands. The girl is then lifted up and led out of the cell while the first deputy is still holding on to her hair. She says she was yelling, I'm not resisting. And he said, whether you're resisting or not, don't care. Then he just kept going and going and going at it. She sustained a bruised hip, sore neck, and headaches. She continues to have anxiety and panic attacks. It has been several years since then. Now you guys are going to love this picture of New Jersey. Okay, in this picture, This is Mr. Bornstein. He's 22 years old. He died in county jail after having been booked for failure to appear in court for pot possession. 6 hours after he was booked, he's heavily bruised, cut, and bleeding, and said dying in the county jail. He was strapped naked to a chair inside an isolation room. So the surveillance video shows him shaking, possibly from a brain seizure, and then falling quiet. The pathologist said Amit was covered with 28 bruises, as well as other severe injuries, and he died from lack of oxygen. No officers were charged. We don't even know what they did to him. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this video. I know it was not exactly a fun one, but it was important to show that a lot of people think that inmates deserve to be harmed in prison. The saying, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Some of these people, some of them are children, and most of them in prisons, in jails, have mental illness, and that is what they're punished for. We have to stop calling this legal. We have to stop calling it humane. We have to stop letting it be justified. So if you don't agree with this, make sure you subscribe, make sure you share this video, and get involved. Again, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.